You know what hurts the most? It's not the betrayal itself. It's realizing the person you loved, the one you trusted with everything, was only waiting for the right moment to stab you in the back. My story starts in a courtroom, but the real war began long before that. The day my husband tried to take half my money, the judge laughed in his face. And no, it wasn't because of some miracle or luck. It was because of one envelope. But before I tell you what was inside, let me take you back to where it all began. I was never the kind of woman who depended on a man. I built my career from scratch, running a small business that turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. Long hours, sleepless nights, taking risks nobody else would. Every dollar in my account had my sweat and my scars on it. When I met Daniel, I thought he admired that. He said he loved my independence, my fire, the way I never backed down. At first, he seemed perfect. Charming, funny, supportive. The kind of man who brings you flowers just because, who remembers the little things. My friends envied me, saying I'd found a rare one. But here's the thing about rare gems. Sometimes they're just glass polished to look expensive. The cracks showed slowly. A joke about me working too much. A comment about how a woman with money is intimidating. Then came the requests. Small at first. Can I borrow a little for this project? I'll pay you back, just need to cover rent this month. I thought nothing of it. We were married. What's mine is his, right? Or so I believed. Months turned into years, and the requests grew bolder. Vacations I paid for, cars he wanted, investments he swore would double. I told myself he was just ambitious, that he needed time to find his place. But deep down I knew. He wasn't building anything. He was draining me. The breaking point came when I found the papers. Divorce papers. Not filled out, not signed, just sitting there on his desk. Alongside them was a neat little folder labeled assets. My assets. My properties, my business accounts, my savings. Every detail written out like a grocery list. He wasn't planning to leave me because of love lost. He was planning to gut me like a fish and walk away with half of everything I had worked for. I felt sick. My chest burned as I flipped through the documents. But I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. Not yet. You see, I've learned that the loudest reaction is often the weakest weapon. Instead, I smiled that night at dinner. I kissed him goodnight. I let him believe I was blind. Because if he thought he was playing me, he had no idea what game I was about to play. When he finally served me those papers months later, pretending it was sudden, I almost laughed. His lawyer spoke with confidence, acting like they had already won. They thought I'd be shocked, broken, begging to keep what was mine. Instead, I nodded. Quiet. Calm. The silence made Daniel uneasy. He mistook it for weakness. But inside, I was sharpening my knives. Court day arrived. I walked in wearing a plain black dress, no jewelry, no flash. I wanted the judge to see me not as a rich woman clinging to wealth, but as someone grounded, someone betrayed. Daniel, on the other hand, strutted in with a new suit, smirking like he had already won. He didn't look at me like a husband. He looked at me like prey. The hearing started, and his lawyer went on about fair division, about supporting his lifestyle, about how marriage meant partnership. They painted him as a man who had stood by me, who deserved his share of my success. I didn't flinch. I didn't interrupt. I let them build their castle of lies brick by brick, because I knew exactly how I was going to crush it. When it was my turn, I didn't rant. I didn't cry. I simply asked the judge if I could submit one final piece of evidence. An envelope. Plain, sealed, and heavier than it looked. I handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Daniel's smirk twitched when he saw it. He hadn't expected this. The judge opened the envelope, pulled out the first sheet, and his brows rose. Page after page, he read silently. Then he chuckled. A low laugh that echoed in the silent courtroom. Everyone froze. My lawyer glanced at me, confused. Daniel's face went pale. The judge looked at my husband and said, "Mr. Daniels, would you like to explain this?" And right there, Daniel's perfect little plan started to burn. The silence in the courtroom was sharp, like the air before a storm. Daniel shifted in his chair, his cocky grin replaced with a nervous twitch. His lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically, but Daniel's eyes stayed locked on the judge's hands as they flipped through the papers. The judge's chuckle had turned into a thin smile, the kind of smile that says, "I've seen it all, but this is something special." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Daniels, it seems your wife has provided us with rather enlightening documentation." I sat perfectly still, calm, controlled. But inside, I was savoring every second. I remembered the night I found that folder on his desk. I had taken photos of everything, every note, every transaction, every email. And I didn't stop there. I dug deeper. His debts. His lies. The fake companies he tried to register under my name. Even the secret account he used to funnel money to another woman. Yes, another woman. The husband who claimed to stand by me had been standing in someone else's bed. He wasn't just greedy. He was a fraud. Daniel finally snapped. This is ridiculous. It's fake, all of it. His voice cracked as he slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed, but it didn't scare me. It didn't scare anyone. It only made him look desperate. The judge raised an eyebrow. Fake. So these aren't your emails, Mr. Daniels? This isn't your signature? These debts, these transactions, they belong to someone else. Daniel stuttered. I mean, it's not what it looks like. The judge leaned back in his chair, almost amused. It looks very much like you were attempting to exploit your wife financially while living beyond your means and hiding assets during this divorce. My lawyer finally stepped in. Calm, precise, the way I asked him to be. Your Honor, every document in that envelope has been verified. Bank statements, registered accounts, even personal messages. If necessary, we can subpoena further evidence. But I think the material speaks for itself. Daniel's lawyer rubbed his forehead, looking like he wanted to melt into the floor. He whispered something, but Daniel shook his head violently. He wasn't giving up. Not yet. She's setting me up. She's twisting things. She planned this. For the first time that day, I spoke. My voice was steady, quiet, but it carried. You're right, Daniel. I did plan this. I planned it the moment I realized you weren't my husband anymore. You were my enemy. And enemies don't get mercy. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge gave me a long, thoughtful look. But I didn't care. This wasn't about looking like the victim anymore. This was about showing Daniel what it feels like when the mask rips off and the whole world sees who you really are. The judge cleared his throat again, breaking the tension. Given this evidence, I am inclined to reconsider the claims made by Mr. Daniels. In fact, he paused, looking directly at Daniel. It may be that your position here is not only weak, but potentially incriminating. Daniel's face flushed red, then drained white. He tried to speak, but his lawyer finally grabbed his arm, hissing, "Stop talking." Now, I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Not because I wanted to destroy him completely, though I easily could, but because I wanted him to feel the weight of his own greed crushing him. The hearing wasn't finished. Not by a long shot, but I could see the tide had turned. Daniel wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the rat caught in the trap, squirming, gnawing, but going nowhere. And the best part, I hadn't even played my last card. Because inside that envelope, beneath the stack of debts and emails and fake accounts, there was one final page. One that Daniel hadn't even dreamed I knew about. One that would not only end his case against me, but might very well end his freedom. But I wasn't going to reveal it just yet. No, timing was everything. And I wanted Daniel to drown slowly in his own panic before I pulled the last thread. As we left the courtroom that day, the session adjourned for review, Daniel tried to catch up with me in the hallway. His face was a storm, anger, fear, humiliation all mixed together. You think you're clever, don't you? He spat. You think you've won. I didn't even look at him. No, Daniel, I said softly. I don't think I've won. I know it. And with that, I walked away, heels clicking against the polished floor, leaving him standing there. For the first time, he didn't follow. For the first time, he had no words. But I knew him. He wouldn't go down without a fight. And that was exactly what I was counting on. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, but because I was exhilarated. I'd spent years bending, shrinking, softening myself to keep peace in a marriage that was already dead. Now, I was awake in a way I hadn't been in years. The war was on, and for once, I wasn't the one bleeding. Daniel must have thought the same, because by morning, I had a dozen missed calls. Voicemails swinging between begging and threats. We can still work this out. Then, you'll regret this. Then silence followed by, I'll ruin you. I didn't reply. Silence is a weapon. And it drove him mad. By the next hearing, he came in looking less like the confident man from before and more like someone cornered. Dark circles under his eyes, tie crooked, sweat beading on his forehead. His lawyer carried more papers this time, a thicker folder, as if trying to bury my evidence under sheer weight. They tried everything. Claims that I was hiding money offshore. that I had manipulated him into signing contracts without knowing, that I had been abusive, controlling, unfaithful. The lies poured like oil across the floor, slick and poisonous. And I stayed calm, because for every accusation, I had proof to the contrary. Receipts, witnesses, emails, screenshots. Each time his lawyer smirked as if they'd found a loophole, my lawyer slid another page across the table that shut them down. The courtroom became a game of chess, and Daniel was playing checkers with missing pieces. At one point, Daniel lost his temper completely. He stood up, shouting about how he deserved half, how I owed him for the years he sacrificed for me. His voice cracked, spittle flying, fists clenched. The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Daniels, sit down or you'll be held in contempt." Daniel froze, breathing hard, chest heaving. Slowly he sat, but his eyes found mine, burning with hate. Not love lost. Not grief. Pure, sharp hate. And that was when I knew I had broken him. But like a wounded animal, he wasn't done clawing. After the hearing, I found out he'd gone behind the court's back, leaking stories to the local press, painting me as the cold, heartless wife who used her money to crush a poor, loving husband. I laughed when I saw the headline: "Businesswoman abandons devoted husband in ruthless divorce." Devoted? The man who funneled money into another woman's account? The man who plotted to gut me like a thief in the night? If only the public knew. And soon they would. Because remember that last page in my envelope? The one I hadn't played yet? That was my nuclear option. But patience, I told myself. Let him dig his own grave first. The next hearing was brutal. Daniel's lawyer came armed with witnesses, his friends, his family, all swearing he had been the perfect husband, that he had supported me emotionally, that he had worked hard behind the scenes, that he deserved recognition through financial support. It might have worked if I hadn't been ready. One by one, my lawyer dismantled them, with bank records showing Daniel had borrowed money from half of them and never paid it back, with text messages proving he had mocked me behind my back, with signed affidavits from people they hadn't expected me to reach, people he'd scammed years before me. By the end, their witnesses looked less like supporters and more like accomplices. Daniel's face was pure panic now. Sweat dripping, jaw clenched, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The courtroom wasn't his stage anymore. It was his cage. And I was the one holding the key. The judge leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Mrs. Daniels, is there anything further you wish to add before I make a ruling?" I paused. My heart thudded, slow and steady. This was the moment. I could end it now, walk away with victory, or I could finish him completely. I reached into my bag and pulled out one last envelope. Smaller this time. Thinner. But far deadlier. Daniel's eyes widened. He knew. Somehow he knew. The judge took it, opened it, and scanned the single sheet inside. His brows furrowed. His lips pressed together. Then he looked up, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Mr. Daniels," he said slowly, "do you have an explanation for this transaction? Because what I'm looking at here is not just relevant to this divorce, it may be relevant to criminal proceedings." The courtroom erupted. Murmurs everywhere. My lawyer leaned toward me, whispering, "You're sure about this?" I didn't take my eyes off Daniel. "I'm sure." Because on that page was proof that Daniel hadn't just been stealing from me. He had been committing fraud, using my name to open lines of credit, forging my signature on loan applications, even attempting to transfer property without my consent. And I had every record, every signature, every date. Daniel's face drained of color. His lawyer scrambled for words, flipping through his folder like salvation might fall out of it. But nothing could save him now. The judge's voice was final. "This court will recess to review these allegations. But let me be clear, Mr. Daniels. If this evidence holds, you are not only losing your claim to your wife's assets, you may very well be facing charges." The gavel struck. Session adjourned. Daniel slumped in his chair, staring at the table as if it could swallow him whole. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked past him. For a moment, I considered saying nothing, letting silence finish the job. But I stopped, leaned close enough for only him to hear, and whispered, "Half my money, Daniel? You won't even have half your freedom when I'm done." He flinched, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not hate, fear. And that was only the beginning. The next week felt like watching a house of cards fall in slow motion. Daniel had always been good at bluffing, good at making people believe he was bigger than he was. But bluffing only works when nobody calls your hand. And I had called it in front of a judge. The court ordered a financial investigation. Every account, every transfer, every shady deal he thought he'd hidden was dragged into the light. I watched the reports pile up like a mountain of debt crushing him. The more they found, the more obvious it became. Daniel hadn't just been greedy. He had been reckless. The first blow landed when the investigators confirmed the forged signatures. Clean copies, matched perfectly to mine. His lawyer tried to argue it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But the bank records were undeniable. Daniel had signed my name to loans I never agreed to, loans he used to fund his own lifestyle. The second blow came from the other woman. Remember her? I hadn't mentioned her name in court yet. I didn't need to, because once the investigators traced money from Daniel's secret account, her name popped up again and again. Rent payments, jewelry, vacations. And when she realized she might be dragged into fraud charges too, she flipped on him faster than a switch. I'll never forget the look on Daniel's face when she walked into the courtroom. Blonde hair, red dress, her heels clicking against the floor with the rhythm of betrayal. He tried to mouth something at her, probably "don't you dare." But she ignored him. She took the stand, and her voice was steady. He told me he was leaving his wife. He said the money was his, that she owed him for everything. He promised me we'd start fresh once the divorce was done. But I didn't know he was stealing. Gasps filled the room. Daniel looked like he'd been shot. He shook his head violently, whispering, "Liar. Liar." But everyone could see it. His own mistress had turned him in. By then, even his lawyer was done with him. He stopped fighting, stopped objecting. You could see it in his eyes. He knew he was representing a sinking ship. And me? I didn't even smile. I just sat, still and calm, because victory doesn't always need fireworks. Sometimes it just needs silence and patience. The judge's patience, however, was wearing thin. "Mr. Daniels," he said sharply, "this court is not only inclined to deny your claim to your wife's assets, but also to refer this matter to the district attorney's office. Fraud, forgery, possible perjury. Do you understand the severity of this?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For once, the man who never shut up had nothing to say. The hearing adjourned again, and I walked out feeling lighter than I had in years. But I also knew greed makes people desperate. And desperate people don't go down quietly. Sure enough, 2 days later, I found myself face to face with Daniel in the parking lot outside my office. He was waiting by my car, looking nothing like the polished man he used to be. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes bloodshot. "You think this is over?" he hissed, stepping toward me. "You think you've won just because you embarrassed me in there?" I didn't flinch. "It's not embarrassment, Daniel. It's justice." His hands curled into fists, his whole body trembling. For a second, I thought he might actually hit me. But then his shoulders slumped. His voice cracked, desperate now. "Please don't do this. I'll lose everything." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. Finally, I said, "You already lost me." And that was everything. I unlocked my car, got in, and drove away, leaving him standing there. A shadow of the man who once thought he could take half my life and walk away smiling. The final session came a week later. By then, the evidence was overwhelming. Fraud confirmed. Mistress exposed. Debt spiraling out of control. The judge didn't waste time. "In light of the evidence," he said firmly, "the court finds in favor of Mrs. Daniels. All claims by Mr. Daniels are denied. Furthermore, this matter will be referred to the appropriate authorities for criminal review." Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. Just like that, it was over. Daniel sat frozen, staring straight ahead, his face pale and empty. His lawyer gathered papers slowly, avoiding his gaze. People around us whispered, some shaking their heads, some smirking. I stood, picked up my bag, and walked past him one last time. He didn't look at me. He didn't move. But I stopped, just for a moment, and whispered in his ear. "You wanted half my money. Now you'll have half a cell. That's the math you earned." And then I left. The moral? Greed blinds. Daniel thought love was a shortcut to wealth. He thought betrayal was cheaper than loyalty. But in the end, greed didn't just cost him half my money. It cost him everything. And me? I didn't win because I was innocent. I won because I was smarter. Because when you're betrayed, you don't just survive. You sharpen your teeth. And when the moment comes, you bite back harder than they ever expected. If divorce court was a storm, the criminal trial was the flood that followed. Once the judge referred Daniel's fraud to the district attorney, the machine of justice started grinding. And once it starts, it doesn't stop until someone is crushed. News spread fast. The same reporters who once painted Daniel as the devoted husband now splashed his face across headlines. Local man accused of fraud in divorce scandal. They loved the irony. A man who tried to brand himself as the victim now exposed as a cheat, a liar, and a thief. At first, Daniel tried to spin it. He gave interviews, claiming I had fabricated everything, that I was using my wealth to destroy him. But interviews cost money, and money was something he no longer had. The more he spoke, the worse he looked, desperate, bitter, clinging to lies everyone could see through. And then came the arraignment. Courtroom packed, cameras flashing. I didn't need to be there, but I went. Not out of spite. Well, not just spite. I wanted him to see me sitting there, calm, steady, unshaken. A reminder that the woman he thought he could strip bare was the one watching him unravel. The prosecutor laid it out clean. Forged signatures, stolen funds, fraudulent accounts. They had enough evidence to bury him twice over. His mistress's testimony sealed it. She sat in the witness box, voice trembling but clear, admitting everything he'd told her. How he'd promised her my money. How he laughed about tricking me. Daniel looked broken, but still tried to interrupt. She's lying. They're all lying. His outburst earned him a warning from the judge. The prosecutor smiled, as if waiting for that moment. Then, calmly, he slid another paper across the table, Daniel's own handwritten notes. The same notes I'd found on his desk months earlier. His plan, in his own words, spelling out how he would take half of everything once the divorce went through. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked like machine guns. And Daniel? He just stared, mouth open, eyes wide. The game was over. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time in years, I let myself truly relax. Because revenge isn't just about the strike, it's about the quiet after, the silence when the storm passes, and you know you've won. But here's the part most people don't understand. Winning didn't make me happy. It didn't heal the wounds he left. Betrayal still hurts, even when you turn it into a weapon. What winning gave me was something else, closure. Proof that justice, slow as it may be, still has teeth. Weeks passed, and Daniel's trial moved forward. His lawyer tried to bargain, to cut a deal. But the prosecution wasn't interested in mercy. Too much evidence. Too much arrogance. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. The words rang through the courtroom like a bell tolling for the dead. Daniel's shoulders slumped, his head bowed. For once, he had no smirk, no defiance, no clever lines. Just silence. When the judge sentenced him, the irony was sharp. You wanted half of what wasn't yours. Now you'll spend half a decade paying for it. 5 years. Minimum security prison, but prison nonetheless. As they led him away in cuffs, he glanced at me one last time. His eyes weren't angry anymore. They weren't even sad. They were empty, like a man who finally realized the game was over, and he had lost. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply watched. Because revenge isn't always fireworks. Sometimes, it's just silence while your enemy falls. The story spread, of course. People whispered about how I'd destroyed him, how ruthless I'd been. Some called me cold. Others called me brilliant. I didn't care. Let them say what they want. They weren't the ones who woke up one day to find their husband plotting to gut their life. And if people thought I was an anti-hero, so be it. Better to be feared than pitied. Because in the end, there was a moral. Greed isn't just ugly, it's self-destructive. Daniel wanted half of everything, but his hunger blinded him. If he had stayed by my side, he would have had more than enough. Comfort, security, even love if he hadn't poisoned it. But instead, he chose greed. And greed always eats itself alive. When I walked out of that final courtroom, the sun was warm on my face. The air felt lighter. My heels clicked against the pavement, each step a reminder I had survived. I had won. And I hadn't just taken back my life, I had taken back my power. And Daniel, he got what he deserved. Half a decade behind bars. Half a chance to think about what he threw away. Justice isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's an envelope handed to a judge. Sometimes it's silence in the face of screams. And sometimes it's just a woman who refused to be broken. And if this story made you smile, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.